So I was just here at Tractor Supply, and that's about as small town feel you're going to get in a store as you would believe. The reason I say that is because my favorite thing about the Midwest is no matter how big the city is, there's always somebody talking about something happening with a building or a business going in. Quick Trips are pretty big around this area, and there's a lot of concern over the fact that there's an intersection that a brand new Quick Trip is going into that had just annihilated like some secondhand stores and gotten rid of them. But there's another Quick Trip just down the road. And the funniest thing to me as I was putting stuff in my car was just hearing these two elderly ladies, just talking about, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, there's a way to come down this way, and then there's another way to come down this other way, but I don't see how I can get to Quick Trip that way. The other one's just so much more convenient. My figure, Jesus, did you hear me right there? My figuring is, what I figure is that they're probably going to keep both. That is the sort of small town thing that I do love about the Midwest. There's a weird charm to it that now that I've lived here as long as I have, whenever I go anywhere outside of the Midwest, it is immediately apparent to me how different everything feels. The South is almost overwhelmingly polite, or strict polite, as I would call it. The East Coast was a complete bizarre thing for me. Anywhere in Chicago is surprising. And I haven't been too far out west aside from Southwest, and that's even got a different thing. But the one thing I do find is the more small town, or just, it's a very American thing. You get people that maybe have come from different areas or maybe lived forever in a town. It's just such a weird, charming thing. It's probably just me. I don't know. Just an observation I had. So I got an email just this morning, probably about 2-3 in the morning. And, well, I found the email. So I was cleaning out, you know how this goes, you're cleaning out your email, and there was a subject that I hadn't seen in a while, and it was from the Brooklyn Art Library. That was part of something that I did. They house, I think, 80,000 sketchbooks. They would take them on tour. And so you could, if you look in my older videos, like way before, probably about, it's been 10 years, maybe, something like that. I don't know how long it's actually been. It's been a little while. I had just started at Hallmark at full-time capacity. And since I didn't have a lot to do, okay, so let me give you a little bit of background on this. The whole concept behind them, if you hadn't heard of this, was that you could purchase what essentially was like a Moleskine-like sketchbook. And I know I have some, because there were 3 attempts I did. Only one of them I completed, which was the initial one. The other 2, I either didn't prioritize correctly, I ran out of time, I wasn't in the zone, and it just did not work out for me. Unfortunately, I think I've, like, the idea was to have done a trifecta. I was going to tell a story of a young man discovering his ability to manipulate things utilizing art, and then ending with him as an old man. It was a story that never really reached fruition as far as a comic book, and I don't know that I'll ever go back to it. The art was very quick and very fast. I had to work on it when I was still at Hallmark, and this is just what it was. When I worked there wasn't a lot of work from me and this other guy. That we were the new hires, and we were doing limited things, learning the ropes and stuff. So needless to say, we had a lot of downtime. And so during my downtime, I figured, well, I can keep my head down, and as opposed to wandering the hallways, I could work on this sketchbook. And I didn't even have that much of a knowledge as to how to do this. I had a phone, and I was like, okay, well, I'll record on that. And I think it was my old, it may have been my iPhone 6 or something like that. It wasn't very high resolution, and I didn't understand about lighting or how exactly to film correctly. So I do have a record. If you watch the video, I'll put a link down below in the description. It's here on my channel, but it's old. If you watch it, it's me at that time drawing it. It's just an overhead shot, and I figured it out. Like I built this makeshift sort of somewhere. I even have a photo of that, where I took 2 rulers and then I piled a bunch of heavy books on the shelf that was over in front of where I sat. And I had a little area that, you know, my Mac was over in the corner. And then I had just a lot of empty area because it's not like I had a lot of paperwork or anything. I'd only just started working there. So I had this clear area where the under the shelf lighting was really bright. And I remember that I was having problems because the fluorescent was blinking at a different frame rate or intensity than the frame rate was. So I got some weird, like that pulsing thing that'll happen in videos. Nonetheless, I managed to figure that out. And I filmed myself drawing all of the pages. The video is a very condensed, like couple of minutes long, all time lapse. But it showed me going through the whole thing and then opening it up and showing each one of the pages at the end of it. I think that was actually right around 2013, which is weird to think that it's been that much time. I don't actually remember, but the reason that I'm bringing this up is because the email unfortunately was stating that the Brooklyn Art Library was closing down, and they were unfortunately going to have to let a lot of the collection pass into new hands. But this was an opportunity for me to get it back. And I thought about what I wanted it to go, where I wanted it to go. It's traveled. It went, I think, to like a couple of different places. They used to have this sketchbook mobile, this van that they would take a lot of them in. And, you know, understand that these are all really thin little sketchbooks. And some of them would have, I'd seen some, you know, shared online when I first joined up with it. And there were people that would stick on the outside and like do some extra things for it and do fold out pages. But for the most part, you had to keep the form factor, because the idea was this thing would travel and people would check out the book and then bring it back. And so there was a lot of honor system there, you know, involved. And I always thought, well, mine would never get stolen or anything else like that. There's so many more other very much skilled people that were doing them. And mine was a fairly simplistic little story. But I'd never left my mind how important that was for me, because that was the first real inkling that I was like, you know, I really want to push forward and do this thing that I had started at an earlier job, which was getting into comics and telling stories. So it was a $15 charge to get the book back, because they're down to one employee who's going through and rifling through all these sketchbooks to return them. I don't mind that. I'm grateful for the exposure that it gave me. And that sounds really crazy, right? Like, oh, exposure. Seriously, I really was happy about that. It's a little bittersweet, though, knowing that yet one more artistic avenue falls by the wayside. And if it's 60 or 80,000 books, either way, thousands of books, a home to thousands of sketchbooks, that's no small collection. And inevitably, where would funding come from to keep something like that going? I mean, if you're trying to rely on it becoming and staying as a nonprofit, I know that there's challenges involved in that. I don't know the whole history of the library, and I know that two or three other areas are going to be getting the books. Now, the caveat was you had this one chance, and you had until like, I think February 8th or 18th, something like that. I don't have the email in front of me, to get your $15 in, get it to the staff member, and then send all identifying information about it. So of course I'm panicking. I'm like, I couldn't remember my password on the Brooklyn Library website to log in. I had never had it digitized, so it wasn't on the digital library they had online. I was like, oh my God. And when I went back and looked at my video, the resolution was so low that I was like, how the hell am I going to find this? And I kept thinking to myself, I was like, wow, was it? I think it had something to do like SB 13 or some sketchbook 13, 2013. I kept freaking out thinking, Jesus, that can't be right. That cannot be right. And sure as shit it was. So I ended up finding all the information, and then I remembered, well, I do have the video, but the video was so blurry. The compression on it was just terrible that when I when I put it up on there, I was like, oh, this is so bad. I may end up remastering that video and uploading an HD version of it if I still have the original video files. If I do, that means they survived 3 different hard drive failures over the years, and that would be a fucking minor miracle if that happened. Nonetheless, I went ahead and paid the $15 via PayPal, and hopefully everything is going to be fine. Hopefully it's not damaged. For some reason, I have a recollection that there was either a flood or a small fire, something along that line that happened, and I believe some of the books may have been damaged. I don't know why that's sticking in my mind. I went back and looked at my emails, and I found nothing about that, but something in the back of my mind was like, was mine one of the ones that was damaged, or did something happen? But I don't recall what that was from. So yeah, that's kind of good news. That's, I'm glad to get it back, right? I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do with it. I'll probably look through it again and make a little video kind of, chronicling it here. It's just amazing that much time has gone by and now something like that's coming back home. It's just really weird. It gets me a little emotional in a good way, right? Because a lot of times we never see the works that we create out in the wild again. The only time it was a weird feeling, I found 2 copies of Pagan Zoetrope, my first comic book, I think issue 2 and issue 3, in a random comic book store in Oklahoma. That was a weird fucking feeling. Because understand, I'm not like other people that have publishers and stuff like that. I fucking self-publish that shit my own. So that means somebody either traded in or bought it from over there and then just ended up in the, in the old comic boxes for people to flip through and pay a quarter for it. I did not buy them. I left them there. I was a little incensed that they were only $1, but I was like, they weren't. To me, it was like, well, they were older and that's fine. They were used. But they looked well loved, and that's all I've got to say about that. So, but with this, that was a nice surprise. I was like, holy shit, that's really cool. That's a good thing. It still feels weird, though, because I think that it'll be interesting to get it back in my hands knowing, wow, you could keep track of how many people online checked it out. Now, there were thousands of these books, and I don't know how they would check them out. I don't know if they went to the actual location. I don't know if it was just through the bookmobile, but for a while, for about 2 to 3 years, I would get updates when somebody checked it out. It would send me an email saying, hey, so-and-so checked out this book. And I thought that was really freaking cool. I don't know how that would work in any other capacity for artists, but that was like an untapped community tool that I thought, this is being underutilized. There needs to be more. And maybe there was more to it. I just didn't go the whole spectrum with it. I have no idea. It was so new to me. I was just ecstatic that it even got into this thing and that I managed to complete a project and get it out there. And when I was drawing it, what kills me is I haven't looked at that video in a very long time. I don't watch a lot of my older YouTube videos very often because they're embarrassing. But when I went back and looked at that, I was like, oh, holy shit. There's a weirdness to it because and I don't know, maybe this is just me being my own harshest critic, but there's a lot of times I look back at it and go, fuck, I've not gotten any better as an artist or whatever. There's that whole thing that hangs over you like, I don't know if I thought I'd be like drawing like Norman Rockwell today. I have no fucking clue. But when I look back, the thing that I really envy about that version, that time, that particular version of myself is there is a wild abandon and no real plan. And that is how I've done a lot of my work. Scripting shit out, working like that is very difficult for me because I have a general idea in my head as to how things are going to bloom, how they're going to pollinate into finished ideas. And it's something that I've struggled with. In fact, I had that issue here just not that long ago. I sent in some real rough sketches because to me, a real rough sketch needs to be just enough for me to work through and to get something done. And I can see what makes sense in a sketch. And I forget that a lot of people who aren't visual artists don't see that. And so it's a massive struggle for me. It's one of the reasons why it is extremely hard for me at times to provide roughs for clients that meet their needs. I often forget that I have to push it to a level of polish that I'm like, this is technically halfway done. even if I'm instructed, well, just, lay some color in or give me some general shapes or what you think it's going to look like. Well, if I do that, then I know where it's going to go. But that's one of the reasons also, going back to the very first video in this series, that I was like, fuck, I need to get out of this because I'm not that great at doing that sort of a thing. Nonetheless, the sketchbook for the Brooklyn Art Library showed, just the footage shows just how I start penciling in things. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to do this. And this is, I don't even remember when I developed the idea or the narrative for it. It just flowed. I remember counting the pages. And in my head, I was like, okay, this is here. This is where he transforms a mailbox. This is where he makes a fire hydrant come to life. This is where he wakes up. This is where he's walking down the street. This is where he goes on. And I got real trippy toward the middle of the book where his imagination basically started to envelop everything. And he's trying to get on a train or a subway. And it becomes this long coiling monster floating through the cosmos. And the wild abandon and imagination that I threw into it was utterly fascinating for me to watch again. And this is why I tell you guys, like, not just photography, but doing something like this, writing in a journal, whatever you do, is an immeasurable way to just chronicle what you're doing and where you're heading. It's a phenomenal way to really be honest with yourself. Sure, there's projects I started, things I've made videos of that I'm like, what the fuck happened with that? Or there's things even in these drawers here, old projects, old illustrations I started that I never finished. That's okay. It's okay to abandon things. It's okay to not complete something as long as you take that as a launching pad to do something else and work toward other goals. And they don't have to be grand things. They don't have to be shit you show off. They just have to be good things. And I guess that's the other thing that got to me was, it's amazing where I was 10 years ago, just in that whole thought process. And now I'm a little bit more measured and a little more wary, but I can definitely see that there's some refinement in what I'm doing compared to back then. Character designs, overall graphic design efforts involved in it, they could have been better, but they still echo, well, what I do today echoes a lot of that. Thankfully, I do see the differences. There's certain tropes, certain angles, certain ways that I draw characters that have stayed the same, and I'm grateful for that. People would be able to see my work and see that there is something of a natural transition, but it still bugs me when I'm like, oh, that doesn't look as good as it did. But it also was a success because it was something I finished and got submitted, and it traveled, and people did check it out. I just wish I'd been able to hear like what they thought about it, what their comments were. I wish there would have been a way for us to have had things like that left online so people could have been able to tell us what they really thought wholeheartedly or anything. That would have been really nice. And it's one of the biggest things that I thought, well, you can tell us when somebody checks this out, but what did they think about it? I know a lot of times whenever somebody will either buy any of my books or anything like that, don't get me wrong, I like making money, but at the exact same time, I'm much happier whenever I get somebody that'll tell me, I love this story, I can't wait to see what's next, or whatever goes on from there. And it couldn't have come in a more timely fashion, considering that I also found, and I'll talk more in depth on that later in a different video, but I had found another video that it's resplendent in how wide it covers the whole concept of why traditional art may soon really be dead through the whole thing with artificial intelligence. It is a little heartbreaking, to say the least. It is an incredibly in-depth essay, and it is well done in so many facets that I've listened to it 3 or 4 times and understood more things about it each time. There are a lot of things to take into consideration while talking about it, and it seems like an alternate dimension compared to when I was doing that sketchbook. Something like AI art, and I am going to stop combining AI and art together. AI output and art. the two of them never would have even been, that wouldn't have been a subject I would have brought up 10 years ago. The most I would have been worried about was just people thieving other people's art and selling reproductions of it or doing things like that, which has been a consistent thing for decades. This is a completely different sort of animal that I, even in my very limited understanding of what the challenges are, shit, I'll be honest, guys, like, it's far more scary than I thought it was going to be. And it's enough that, like, it's kept me up at night. It's made me think about things. It's made me think about, there's a bird, and I know I'm going to butcher the name because I am not good at the Hawaiian language, but it was a bird that was on the island of Kauai. It belonged to a small family of birds that drank nectar, if I recall right. And the last time its mating call was recorded was a lone single male specimen that had been recorded. And the bird songs were the male calling out, and then the female would conjoin in the harmony back and forth. And that was part of the mating process. No answer was forthcoming for this bird. And that, just listening to the audio, you can find it on YouTube, a couple different clips of it. Something about that hit me. Because I'm going to be very frank and state that conceptually, the idea of artificial intelligence manufacturing something that is attempting to pass off as art is akin to pushing forward our own methodologies and acceptance of the extinction of who we are as creatives. A community was built around, and could have been fostered far beyond this, with the Brooklyn Art Library and the whole sketchmobile and the whole sketchbook concept. It went on for a good many years until this year. All things come to an end. But it felt like this was one that, regardless if it was financial or time or space, I don't know. But at least it had an ending, and there was some modicum of trying to give a final farewell to some of the books or give them a home. These were all things created by hand to be checked out, held in hand, and perused, appreciated, to become an inspiration for others to want to do them or other things. My biggest regret is never having been able to get to the sketchbook library to check the things out myself. I think I could have spent hours doing that. I feel like a doomsayer when I talk about AI art and what the implications are. It is fundamentally something so frightening and so misunderstood that the very banal aspect of saying it out loud makes me sound like somebody that doesn't want change. In the video that I'll talk more in depth about later, but I can certainly jump into now since I'm already in the throes of it, the gentleman narrating it goes into how the biggest thing that's thrown back in anyone's face that is against this whole AI thing is that we're curmudgeons of some sort. We refuse to grow. We refuse to change. We refuse to evolve. I was absolutely enlightened and happy to hear that gentleman's narration go into the fact that, no, he knew 3D modeling. His very first 3D software he ever learned was Bryce 3D. I have a disc of that. It ran on my old Windows 95 laptop, which is sitting right here, my old Toshiba Satellite Pro. That is the very first 3D software I learned. And he went on to talk about all of these other things, that these skill sets, all of these things that he built up to. And anybody worth a grain of salt knows that the industry very much has created this facilitation where when you go out and you look for a job these days, I do not envy anyone getting out of design school or art school at this point. Now you have a two-front battle. On one side, you are attempting to fulfill the needs, dreams, and desires of people wanting you to work for them, but only if you come right out of school with 21 years of knowledge caked on you, baked into your brain, and an incredibly and dynamically deep understanding of maybe all of the Adobe suite. And can you also do Word? And can you also proofread? And can you do all these things? Like, it is absolutely maniacally horrible how overwhelming it must be to graduate school, to get out of anything, to just even wander into the world of art without any formal education and think to yourself, how the fuck am I going to make it? And now on the other side, you have this thing populated by people calling themselves synthographers. And it's just an absurdness that is at the exact same time that you're trying to scale a wall just to get over into the city so that you might be able to gain a footing, might be able to gain some attention. You're getting arrows in the back. Thieves are running around your camp and taking what you've already had for years and are creating now and doing things with it. And I know that there's a fair amount of people that would listen to everything I'm saying and think, well, he is being melodramatic. And I really wish I was. I love a good melodrama. I'm not. I'm really not. Do I think that the impact will be mind-numbingly overwhelming immediately? It depends on who you are and what's going on. I know that there are colleagues of mine that are already facing this. I know that there are people out there already questioning if it's quantifiable to have creatives on staff with this new burgeoning technology. I do wonder what the legal repercussions and ramifications will be and how different it would have been. Because think about it this way. Even the entire library, because for those of you that don't know, the basics behind Midjourney, a lot of these other ones, they utilize data sets. And from what I'm understanding, there are a lot of them. And each data set can contain billions of URLs, images, reference points, everything to cull from and then reinterpret. My images for my sketchbook, had I digitized it, would have been online all this time. As it is, I have a video that shows all the pages. It's very granular, but the point is it's online. There isn't anything protecting the others that are on the current website for the Brooklyn Art Library. You can check them out. You can see them. You can see them in their virtual thing for at least until the site closes down. But even when the site closes down, that could just mean the URL goes away. Those files may or may not be deleted. I don't really know what happens to those things. Does anyone? How many of you out there, just like me, have a mydiary.net or a LiveJournal or a Facebook page that you forgot the password for? Or maybe you are on Friendster, MySpace, any of that stuff. We all have abandoned emails. We all have accounts we haven't logged into since, there were like 2 other presidents prior. Things like that, at the very least. There are things like that that make me realize just how much we are creating. And I covered that in one other video. Like, it is incredible how much media we are creating. I mean, in fact, right now, there are other people sitting down recording videos, whether they're vlogs or not, and they're getting ready to upload them. I can't even remember the amount of data that is uploaded to YouTube on a daily basis. And it blows my mind as to where it's all being stored. Who actually has the physical ownership of that digital file? I would love to say it's in my account. Nobody can do this sort of thing. And there is the whole concept of a creator making something and putting it up somewhere and that is theirs by the simple act of creation, but it is far less simple than it ever was before. There's so many questions that have arisen for me in all of this, and it's absolutely that nervous kind of wringing the hands sort of energy. I didn't anticipate that getting my book back would mean that much. In fact, I had thought about doing a journal entry where I was going to kind of review my book and talk about it, just as kind of like, hey, here's 10 years later, or whatever time it's been. And not that suddenly mid-journey or somebody's going to be pulling up all these things and typing my name into anything, but I thought, what is the price now of sharing things digitally? What are we doing? But we've walked our way into this, right? People get social anxiety. We don't like dealing with people a lot of times in real life. Hell, I've got messages that I still haven't answered back yet. I don't know what the answer is. But I know that at some point in time, there will be a real discourse that is going to happen on what that means for us to own something and what that means in the long run for our livelihoods. And I have no idea what sort of form that's going to take. It is absolutely going to be wild. It probably won't be the most exciting thing to anyone who's unfamiliar with what's happening. At least that is until it starts to take over other things. I never thought, on that same note, that I'd be doing journals and talking about something like AI infiltrating so much of our livelihoods. That was not the overarching theme that I thought I would be talking about. Granted, had I started this, my original idea had been to start this back when COVID started, which would have been really surreal. But it would have been interesting then too. Nonetheless, yeah. So with that, that's all I got for today. I've got, again, a bunch of stuff now that I'm migraine free. Knock on wood, to get done. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing uploaded. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll be back tomorrow with yet another entry in the series.